You've probably seen this painting 1,000 times in museums, in textbooks, on the internet, on coffee mugs, on t-shirts, on the walls of every art classroom you've ever been in. You know this face. But here's something I want you to do right now. Picture the Mona Lisa in your mind, her expression, her hands, the landscape behind her. Now tell me, does she have eyebrows? Take a moment. Think about it. Most people can't answer with certainty because most people have looked at this painting hundreds of times and never noticed. Not because the eyebrows are subtle, but because your brain told you it already knew this painting and stopped looking. That's not just interesting, that's the whole story. Before we get to the eyebrows, we need to talk about why this painting matters at all. Because the Mona Lisa is, by almost any measure, the most famous artwork in human history. And yet, if you've ever stood in front of it at the Louvre, your first reaction is almost always the same. It's smaller than I expected. Why? Part of it is Leonardo. When the greatest mind of the Renaissance spends 4 years on a single painting, people pay attention. Part of it is the subject, almost certainly Lisa del Giocondo, wife of a Florentine merchant, transformed by Leonardo's brush into what centuries of writers would call a mysterious seductress. Part of it is that smile. Is she happy, melancholy, amused? 500 years of scholars haven't agreed. And then there are her eyes. Look at the painting from any angle and she appears to be looking directly at you. Always. An optical illusion that has unnerved visitors for centuries. This is the most studied, most analyzed, most replicated artwork in human history. Experts have spent entire careers examining every brushstroke, which makes what happened next almost impossible to believe. For centuries, the explanation seemed obvious. Renaissance fashion among high society women dictated shaved or plucked eyebrows. Portraits from the period confirm it. Walk through any collection of 15th century Italian paintings and you'll find noble women with smooth, bare forehead. Clean, refined, fashionable. So when people looked at the Mona Lisa and saw no eyebrows, they nodded. Of course, Leonardo painted what he saw. The woman had no eyebrows because women of her class didn't have eyebrows. Case closed. Others suggested it was artistic choice. Leonardo was known for pushing boundaries. Perhaps he deliberately omitted them for aesthetic reasons, to give the face a timeless, almost ethereal quality. That explanation also made sense, so that became the story too. Two perfectly reasonable explanations, both widely repeated, both written into art history guides, museum placards, and academic papers. And because the explanation existed, nobody looked further. Here's the thing about the human brain. Once it decides it understands something, it stops examining it. Art historians spent careers studying this painting. Its composition, its sfumato technique, its layered glazes, the mystery of her smile. They looked at the Mona Lisa thousands of times, but they looked at it as a perfect masterpiece. And somewhere in that reverence, they stopped noticing the one thing that was missing. In 2004, a French engineer named Pascal Cotte approached the Louvre with an unusual request. He wanted to photograph the Mona Lisa, not with a regular camera, with a patented 240 megapixel multispectral imaging system he had spent years developing. A camera that captures light beyond the visible spectrum, seeing into layers of paint that the human eye simply cannot reach. The Louvre said yes, and what followed was 3,000 hours of analysis. Cotte went through the scans layer by layer, and on the left eye, in the region where an eyebrow should be, he found something. A single brushstroke, faint, almost invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakably there. He then did something crucial. He compared the brushstroke to Leonardo's other works, specifically Lady with an Ermine, another portrait painted around the same period. The eyebrow hair in that painting matched the technique of the trace he'd found on the Mona Lisa. Same method, same precision, same artist. Leonardo da Vinci had painted eyebrows on the Mona Lisa. He also found traces of eyelashes. Fine, delicate, painted with what Cotte described as a single hairbrush. The level of detail was extraordinary. Cotte's conclusion was simple. It was not logical, he said, that Leonardo, a man who spent 4 years on this painting, who studied human anatomy obsessively, who drew every muscle and tendon in the human face with scientific precision, would simply omit the eyebrows. He didn't omit them, he painted them with extraordinary care. They just weren't there anymore. So if Leonardo painted them, where did they go? There are two explanations, neither has been definitively proven. The first is time. Leonardo built the Mona Lisa in layers, applying a special glaze over the base painting, then adding fine details like the eyebrows and eyelashes on top of that glaze. Over 500 years, the chemistry of those upper layers changed. Paint oxidizes, varnish yellows, delicate details painted on top of a glaze are the most vulnerable. The first to fade, the first to disappear. The second explanation is more uncomfortable. The Louvre has cleaned and restored the Mona Lisa multiple times over the centuries. Restoration in earlier eras was not the precise science it is today. A cloth, a solvent, a well-meaning conservator trying to remove centuries of grime. It is entirely possible that in one of those cleaning sessions, someone wiped away what Leonardo had spent weeks painting with a single hairbrush, without ever knowing what they'd done. We don't know which explanation is true, we may never know. 500 years of study, 3,000 hours of multispectral analysis, and the most examined painting in human history still won't tell us exactly how its most famous missing detail disappeared. What we do know is this: for 500 years, nobody noticed they were gone. Here's what makes this story more than just an art mystery. Think about how many people have looked at the Mona Lisa, not casually, professionally. Art historians who dedicated careers to this painting, Louvre curators who walked past it every single day, restoration experts who examined its surface under magnification, Leonardo scholars who knew every detail of his technique, and none of them noticed the eyebrows were missing. Not because they weren't looking, but because they thought they already knew what they were looking at. The human brain is extraordinarily efficient, unique, and extraordinarily lazy. When you've seen something hundreds of times, your brain stops processing it fully. It fills in what it expects to see. You think you're looking, but you're actually just confirming. Psychologists call this perceptual habituation. Your brain decided it knew the Mona Lisa, so it stopped actually seeing it. And then there's what happened next. Once the fashion explanation existed, Renaissance women shaved their eyebrows. Leonardo painted what he saw, it spread. Not because it was proven, but because it was close enough to reality to feel true. It fit what people knew about the Renaissance. It fit what they could see in other portraits. It answered the question neatly. And here's the thing about neat answers. Once they exist, they become self-reinforcing. Person A tells person B. Person B writes it in a guide. The guide gets cited in a book. The book gets referenced in a documentary. The documentary gets watched by millions. And somewhere in that chain, the explanation stops being a theory and becomes a fact. The most deceptive lies are the ones closest to reality. That's why the fashion explanation survived for 500 years. Not because it was true, because it was almost true. And almost true, repeated often enough, becomes indistinguishable from certain. The next time you stand in front of the Mona Lisa, or any painting, any statue, any artifact from the past, I want you to try something. Don't look at it the way you think you're supposed to. Don't look for what you've been told is there. Look for what might be missing. Because here's what 500 years of the world's most studied painting taught us. We don't see reality. We see our expectation of reality. And when those two things diverge, when something changes, disappears, or was never quite what we thought, we often don't notice. Not because we're not paying attention, but because we're paying attention to the wrong thing. Leonardo da Vinci painted eyebrows on the Mona Lisa with extraordinary precision, with a single hairbrush, and somewhere between his studio in Florence and the bulletproof glass at the Louvre, they vanished. Time, or human hands, or both. And for 500 years, the most educated, most dedicated, most expert eyes in the world looked at that painting and saw exactly what they expected to see. Nothing missing at all. The most deceptive lies are the ones closest to reality.